G'day, I'm Owen, and you've joined the pub test. And we have a really intriguing case today. And normally we would be discussing the victims in the case, firstly. But this time we're really focusing on the person currently in prison for the crimes, AJ Armstrong. And why we're doing that is because this case is so intriguing. There's so much different detail that it's really hard to work out exactly if justice has been served. So let's dive into it. Now, I came across this case by seeing another true crime YouTuber. It's Mike from that chapter. I put a link to his video in the description. So if you haven't heard anything about this case at all before, and you haven't seen his video, then we'll stop now. You go have a look at it, and then jump back in here as we just analyze some stuff in a little bit of a different way as we do here at the pub test. So as he would say in his videos, go give it a go. We're not including that in the final take, are we? You're going to edit that out? Okay. So just keep going. And then we're going to have to dive a little bit into some very weird evidence, I suppose. And also a comment at the end. A twist in this tale. We're going to see, has justice been done? If we were telling this story, would it pass the pub test? So let's go. Now, a couple of things initially made the police very suspicious of AJ. In that first emergency service call that he made, he said, "It's all my fault." So they're thinking, maybe just a slip, that he's just admitted guilt. And also the house did have a security system. And yet AJ had to disarm the security system to allow the police to come in. So they're saying that someone else breaking into the house just doesn't make a lot of sense. And then, on top of that, the house had cameras, and they just say, well, no one was seen entering or leaving the property. So we can understand why they're now thinking, well, it definitely had to be someone from inside the house, because no one had got in and no one had gone out, according to the security, according to the cameras. And also the murder weapon itself, the gun that they know committed the crime, was found inside the house, just resting on the kitchen counter. And so they're now thinking, well, there was no panic or anything, so it would be appearing very much so that the person who did it had to be inside. And on further investigation, they find that AJ himself wasn't travelling so well at school. Now, his parents were high achievers, and they expected people put in the work, they get the results. AJ's father himself had played in the NFL. Now, he didn't have a stellar career in the NFL, but I would say that if you could even get one game in the NFL, that would suggest that you must have a lot of determination and hard work. Now, he did have a reasonable career playing football, and so then he took that to his business life, and the parents ran a gym and were quite successful in everything they did, and even Antonio himself was doing some motivational YouTube series as well. So the police then make the case because of that because AJ was starting to struggle and he was getting involved in non-prescribed medications and pretty well much a bit of marijuana, that this was putting a lot of pressure on him, and this was his way out of relieving that pressure. Now, AJ was 16 years old when this happened. They also point to the fact that AJ initially said he'd never touched the gun. but they found a hole in his bedroom floor that went through into his parents' room. It was a 3-story apartment townhouse they were living in. And so he's shot a gun through his floor into his parents' room, and he covered up that bullet hole with some clothes. Now, this wasn't on the night of, but it was around about that time. And so he admitted, okay, I had actually used the gun. And it would appear that he shot the gun through a pillow. And the police allege that, well, that's exactly what happened to his parents. And so he may have been testing how effective a silencer was, a pillow as a silencer, to minimize the amount of noise, maybe not to wake up anyone else in the house. Don't really know. But yeah, that is a bit strange, isn't it? That you've shot the gun through the floor. And they say his demeanor was wrong. He was just too calm. And I would tend to agree with that. If you haven't yet, check out that chapter and see that particular episode. And you do get that sense that he was really answering questions matter-of-factly. You would think as a 16-year-old that you would be a little bit more torn up over the fact that your parents had been murdered, particularly if you didn't do it and you saw someone in your house. I don't think you'd be so calm. The police also put it to him saying, if you've shot that gun, we're going to find the evidence. Because when on the scene, when they turned up that night, both him and his sister had their hands wrapped in bags so that they could do ballistics testing to see whether or not he had fired that gun. And in that interview, you see they're saying, if we're going to do the tests, now's the time to come forward, because it's going to be too late when we find the ballistics on your hands. Now, we can understand why the police would have been thinking that definitely it was AJ that did it. And if you've been watching true crime or interested in it, you would know that often when it comes to almost an entire family being wiped out, it is the person on the phone that's done it. It just seems to be the way. For some absolute miracle, they didn't go and take out that one person. Yet there are some discrepancies, and they're so difficult to reconcile. To start with, the whole family wasn't wiped out. AJ's sister was also still alive. So that tends to look like it was more of a targeted thing against the parents for whatever reason. But as we said, many times when something like this happens, the person makes sure that they'd leave no eyewitnesses. Now, he had to go wake up his sister. So when these guns have gone off, it hasn't disturbed her for whatever reason. But the police saying, well, you had to disarm the alarm. The alarm hadn't been triggered. But he pointed out that the windows didn't have alarms on them. Now, I know a little bit about security systems, and that is a major flaw in most people's security. They'll arm your doors, and you think that's really good, but how many people pop through a window? And therein lies the problem. He was saying someone came in a window, obviously, and maybe left through a window. Hence, the alarm system hadn't gone off. But the police say, well, we would have seen someone on your cameras. Your security would have picked up people coming in and out, and we didn't see anybody. Yet he could highlight that the camera at the back of the house wasn't functioning. So there was no video evidence at the back of the house. Interestingly, that was pretty much where the kitchen was, where the gun was found. And that's also a question in my mind about the gun. Because the police said because it was just placed there, that someone in a panic or someone breaking in to shoot people would not have just placed it casually on the counter. Yet I would disagree with that from the point of view that it looked like this was a targeted attack. So if this was a professional person that really knew what they were doing, absolutely I can see someone getting in through the window, getting the gun, casually doing like execution style shootings, and walking out, putting the gun down nice and calm to send a message to say, this is what happened. And in further support of that, there was some really weird evidence that the police actually had possession of, which they kept away from AJ's defense team. And that was the next door neighbor rang up and told the police that her husband and AJ's father were involved in some prostitution ring. And she was now worried that maybe the same thing would happen to them, because perhaps something had gone wrong and they would now be a target as well and getting executed by some underworld figure. That didn't go anywhere, that investigation. But even that accusation just did not seem to be on point for Antonio and his wife. They didn't appear to be involved in anything untoward. Though their gym that they owned was raided by masked people a couple of days after they were shot. And computers and everything like that were stolen. It's a fascinating little tangent that this case went down. But my point being is, if there was any truth to that at all, I can see why the gun was just left on the counter. But there's a note beside the gun, and the police say it was just too contrived. The note that it was left there is just like someone's quickly written something down to show someone had broken in, and they're saying that, yeah, that's just AJ trying to cover himself. But I don't get why there was no real handwriting evidence done on that particular note. Like, who wrote it? And you can't really hide your handwriting that well either. So if they didn't do handwriting analysis, or if they did, why has that not really been brought up? And also in AJ's defense, and I find this quite fascinating, they're saying, we're going to do the test. We're going to find the evidence. It's time to come clean now. And that is often the time when the perpetrator will just break down. They realize the game's up. They might have bought themselves a little bit of time, but there's no point in trying to hide it now. He says, do the tests. You won't find anything. He goes, I was not in that room. I did not pull that trigger. And they do the test. And it comes back clean. He had no ballistic residue on his hands. So it could have been he was wearing gloves, but no gloves were found, and so forth. But the confidence in how he said that, didn't do the test, you won't find anything. It fairly strong indication that either he knew, and here's an interesting little twist, that particular gun may not leave any residue. He may have known that, but would you be so sure in that instant? Remembering they were painting this picture of this kid not going so well at school, on a bit of weed, and now all of a sudden he's ballistic expert. just not quite matching up, is it? They even said to him, the police, well, you're probably regretting now not making it look like someone broke in. But that goes back to my point that if this was targeted, if this was an execution style thing, then yeah, no, they're not ransacking the house. They weren't looking for phones. They weren't looking for car keys. They were there to do a job. Now this goes to trial, and the initial jury verdict was 8-4. 8 thought he was guilty, 4 thought he was innocent, so a mistrial happened. The second trial, again, it was 8-4, but this time 8 people thought he was innocent, 4 people thought he was guilty. But then by some miracle, before the third trial, the prosecution finds DNA evidence of AJ's father's blood underneath a little bit of strip that they put on his clothing. And then, with that bit of DNA evidence which tied him to being in that room, he was convicted. That evidence is so sketchy, isn't it? They had that for 7 years, and it was only after that amount of time did they find any skerrick of DNA evidence. See, remember, in 2016, AJ was a 16-year-old kid. In 2023, when he's convicted, he's now 23 years old. He's become a father. It didn't show that he was doing anything really wrong during the whole time, during that 7 years. So, that DNA evidence, it really does look dodgy, doesn't it? But now for the twist. And as I say, when you're a writer, you strip away all the excess, and then you can see things just perhaps a little clearer. And I say in this case a little clearer because I'm not 100% sure. But there was just one detail that still sort of strikes me. And that is that it was AJ's mother that was shot twice, and his father was only shot once. And in interviews, when they were asking AJ, well, what's your family life like? He said, yeah, it's great, no problems. Like, if any issues come up, Dad and I can talk it out. Mum's a bit more difficult. That's just paraphrasing. She has her moments. He sort of implied that his mum seemed to be a bit harder work. Now, if that was a cover, him just saying it's not as bad as it sounds, but he really was that angry, the fact that his mum was shot twice and his dad was still alive when the police turned up and took him away. He obviously couldn't talk or anything, and he did die in the hospital. But if the father was involved in a prostitution ring, you would think that he'd be shot more so, like really sending that message. But if you're angrier with someone, maybe you'd fire the 2 bullets into them first. I don't know. That's total speculation. But it just gave me a pause to reconsider a lot of the other evidence. So was justice done? Does this story pass the pub test in that AJ is serving time for the murder of his 2 parents? It's split for me. I can see the clear evidence as to why they definitely think that he did it. The DNA evidence coming out 7 years later saying that proved that he was in the room. Even without that, even if we discount that DNA evidence, I would say that it could easily look like that he perpetrated the crime. But on the other hand, I could also say it's easy to see how he didn't do it, that someone else has come in and committed this atrocious act. So that's where, in this particular case, I look at reasonable doubt. 2 trials happened, and they were split both ways, both times. And it was the introduction of that DNA evidence which sealed it. And if he did it, then that's fair. But if he hasn't done it, well, that's an injustice. And I really don't know which way I land still on whether I think he's more guilty or innocent. I really am 50-50 on this one. But I would say that I think if I was on the jury, I would have reasonable doubt. So I think I'd be saying, if I'm only 50% sure, I would think that I'd be saying he's innocent, only from a point of not wanting to convict an innocent person. Because the evidence could easily show that perhaps he did. Now, there's lots of extra information you can Google on this, and it can sway you one way or another depending on the leaning of the person that's written the article. But for me, this pub test is split. We're going to be sitting down there arguing this one for a long time. The pub's probably going to run out of beer while we're discussing this. So I think that brings this one to a conclusion. I don't think it's going to be the last we're going to hear of it, though, because I'm assuming that there'd be some appeals in the works, if not already happening. But if you want to support us, check out the books. Go read Corporate Jungle. If you're into a good mystery, have a look at it. Keep an eye out for our next case, which will be coming out shortly. Do all the usuals. Like, subscribe, make sure you don't miss an episode. You've been watching the Pub Test. This is Owen, and we're out.